Welcome to Young Living's Idaho Balsam Fir Harvest. We are here in the beautiful Idaho Panhandle, just south of the Canadian border, where Young Living Essential Oils is embarking on the historic harvesting of the Idaho balsam fir trees. This little bottle of oil contains the secret, the keys to health, longevity, and vitality for the 21st century. And how do we obtain this precious oil? Let us hear from the man who has made it all possible, President and founder of Young Living Essential Oils, D. Gary Young. Welcome, Gary.
Hi, Terry. How are you?
I am so excited to be here.
Even in the cold.
Yes. You know what? It's intoxicating and it's inspiring. And can you share with the viewers what happened 7 years ago or 8 years ago to start this experience?
Terry, that's an interesting question. And really what began my studies and my interest in it was the story that I got involved with years ago out of the Hebrew University when there was a paper published stating that possibly what was referred to as gold that the Magi brought the Christ child was balsam oil that came from the western shores of the Dead Sea near En-Gedi, where balsam grew wild, and that they harvested and distilled it in a very crude distillery, which I found in 1996 in the mountains. And when we took the university archaeologists there from the discovery, and we took mortar samples, we found frankincense resin, myrrh resin, and balsam resin in the mortar of that distillery vat. And so this paper that was published stated that balsam was called liquid gold. And because it was so precious that they would bring that to the Christ child, I started looking for balsam. And 9 years ago, I was driving north to Canada looking for balsam and came across this property. And the gentleman that owned it at that time had a contractor in here with a bulldozer, and they were pushing the trees into piles and burning them. Because it was originally planted as a Christmas tree plantation to be harvested, but the market had dropped in Christmas trees at this time of his production, and he couldn't afford to harvest the trees, and they had overgrown now, and so they couldn't be marketed as Christmas trees. So he was just pushing them in piles and burning them. And, I was just heartsick. And so I asked him, I said, I will clear your land in exchange for the trees. And he was elated because he was paying $400 an acre to burn his own trees.
Oh.
So it saved him $400 an acre, and we got the trees. Shortly after I moved in, and I made my first harvest 9 years ago, just for a sample, and we distilled it, and the oil was phenomenal. So then we harvested again in October 8 years ago, and then in January, February, March 7 years ago. And it was just an amazing experience when we discovered with the oils.
Being here today, the only thing I can think of is it reminds me of a symphony of scent. If the viewers could smell what we are smelling today, it is so exotic and so exquisite. Can you tell us about the health properties of balsam oil?
Oh, it is, Terry, very exciting because first I did the studies 7 years ago in our clinic in Utah before I sold it. And that was phenomenal because, as we know, cortisol is a hormone in the body and it's referred to as a death hormone. But cortisol is what makes us age prematurely. It's what reduces the immune system. Our compromised immune system, cortisol levels are always high. We also see that people who experience depression have high levels of cortisol. When the body is high with cortisol, it also produces acid, high acid levels. And I thought, there's something to this balsam oil besides other things that I was looking for. So we started doing a study in the clinic, and lo and behold, we discovered that just breathing the aroma from the oil through the distillation was lowering cortisol. And I got so ecstatic with that because nothing on the market today will lower cortisol like balsam fir.
That is, what about, so breathing it is one way. What about, what are the benefits of rubbing it topically on the body? Which body systems would it be good for?
Oh my goodness. I want to be specific because my immediate thought to your question was all systems.
Yes.
Because if you lower cortisol, all systems benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, also your body doesn't produce as much acid. But the areas where I see, clinically speaking, the greatest benefit with the balsam fir is our patients with inflammatory process. Balsam fir rubbed on the chest, on the throat, you know, a little bit in the nostrils to open the sinuses is phenomenal. And if you put balsam fir with a little bit of blue eucalyptus from Ecuador, it's magical for the respiratory tract and open up the air pathways. It's just absolutely beautiful. It also enhances circulation.
Okay.
Now there's also a small compound in all of the conifer trees, methyl salicylate. And it's a very small amount in balsam fir, but we see it greater in the birch oil or wintergreen naturally. But that element, along with the terpenes, stimulate the repair process of the tissue. You rub it on, and I also rubbed it in my shoulders because yesterday I used the power saw a lot, working in the machines, feeding the chipper. I noticed my shoulders were a little tired, a little sore. So I just rubbed it right in my shoulders last night before I went to bed, got up this morning, and there was nothing.
So now I have a question. You mentioned the temperature today,
Yeah.
and it's really cold, and my fingers are really cold. Why do you harvest this beautiful fir tree in the middle of the winter?
It's a good question. I think it's just to see how much endurance we have. No. Here's what I discovered. The first time I cut in 2000 was in August, and we distilled, and there was a very low yield of oil. And I was quite shocked, and I thought, well, it's not cost effective. I can't afford to harvest these trees for such low yield. And so, but the feeling was there that I could do it.
Okay.
So I went back in October after we'd had a few freezes, and we cut a truckload and brought it out. We distilled it, and we got about 28% more oil. So I started just thinking of the mechanics of the tree. The tree produces its own sap, which is the oil, to protect itself against the cold, because the sap works as a natural antifreeze for the tree. So the colder it gets, the more oil it produces. And so the next time I harvested, we harvested in January after it had been down below zero, and our yield went up another almost 50%. So that's why we're here.
Okay.
And, you know, I have a saying, the harsher the conditions, the greater the oil. And you've probably heard me say, the harsher the soil, the greater the oil. And it is, it's true. Aromatic plants sometimes produce a greater oil when the conditions are a little more adverse.
One other question that the viewers might be wondering about. Can you tell us a little bit about reforestation and how that works and you know, protecting the forest?
Yeah, and we know that trees will only live for so long, then they naturally cycle and die and new ones start to grow. These balsam trees, as you have seen here, around the perimeter our trees still look pretty good, but we take one tree off the perimeter and inside the trees are dying. And so they would not last much longer. And we've lost 50% of our growth, and the viewers will see that in some of the footage you have. So as we take the trees off, as we have already, we've started replanting. And it's a cycle. We take the tree, we plant a tree. And it's just part of maintaining God's nature.
And in the meantime, we have this precious oil, just like they had thousands of years ago.
Absolutely.
So,
and Terry, there's another aspect. We know that each tree produces 2 or 3 bottles of oil.
yes.
And every home that's diffusing that oil is increasing the atmospheric oxygen.
Do you know, I had a woman come to my home about a week ago we had a little gathering, and I was diffusing some oils into the air. And the next day she called and she said, I don't know what I was smelling, but I have to have it. What was I smelling in your home? It was so exciting.
Yeah. Well, this is a way that you can have Christmas tree in your home year-round.
That's right, that's right.
Because
30 miles south of the Canadian border, with the temperature at 0 degrees, B. Gary Young, with 10 young living men, are harvesting the magnificent Idaho Balsam Fir. The air is quite crisp in the early morning hours, so after fueling and warming up the equipment, the work begins. The first stage of the harvest involves a skid loader, also called a skidster, with a shear attached to the front. The hydraulic shear involves two 20-inch hardened steel blades. The skidster cuts, pivots, and drops the 20 to 30 foot tall trees systematically along the edge of the tree plantation. As you see, the snow is deep enough to necessitate using the shear to pull the snow back from the base of the tree, allowing the shear to cut the tree as close to the ground as possible, which hopefully eliminates puncturing a tire. The second stage of the process involves a skidster with a grapple attachment. The grapple scoops up 2 to 3 trees in its jaws to transport them over the uneven terrain, dropping them next to the chipper. The excavator, similar to a backhoe, then is able to finesse the massive trees into the opening of the chipper. The Intimidator then growls as it pulverizes the entire tree into no larger than quarter-size fragments. Through a hopper, the chipper then hurls the chips into a 40-foot semi-trailer. The final stage of the harvest is a semi-tractor with 2 trailers attached, making the arduous 125-mile trek south to Young Living's St. Mary's Lavender Farm, where one of the 4 proprietary distilleries Young Living operates throughout the world will begin the distillation process. As mentioned, the harvest takes a toll on the equipment, and so untimely breakdowns unfortunately occur on a regular basis. As you can see, the skidster has a flat tire, which required removal of the steel track in order to repair the tire. Replacing the track with as much tension as possible, which facilitates the best traction, is also a grueling task. Since the harvest occurs on the frozen tundra of the northern panhandle of Idaho, the roads can be treacherous and quite hard on the various trucks, and particularly hard on the tractor-trailer semis which haul the chips out of the bush. Here we see Gary Young atop his D6 Caterpillar tractor, grading the road to smooth the unruly frozen path. Can the viewers imagine operating such a powerful piece of equipment? Obviously, Gary recognizes the need to grade the road, but I also believe this is one of the many challenges which brings him great joy.
We've just arrived at the Young Living Essential Oil Farm in St. Mary's, Idaho, and this is a little piece of heaven. Would you like to know how Gary Young took the huge 20 and 30 feet balsam trees and has turned it into this healing bottle of oil? Let's go look at the distillery and see what Gary's up to this morning.
Footage of the lavender field in the summer. Insert that.
Well, Gary, we made it safely to the farm, and it's very exciting to be here. Beautiful place. And I just would love to know if you could walk us through the process of how you start with the magnificent balsam fir trees and end up with this little bottle of healing oil.
it's pretty interesting, isn't it?
It's amazing.
You know, most people, Terry, really do have a hard time comprehending what goes into producing this little bottle of oil. And I hope now, after you being here, you can have a greater appreciation for what it takes.
I do.
The art is here in the distillation, but it's also knowing the proper time for harvesting and how to care for it from the harvest to the distillation system.
So approximately how many hours would you be distilling Idaho Balsam Fir?
Terry, it's 2.5 hours of productive distilling time.
From the picturesque valley in Idaho, the Idaho Balsam Fir chipped material is loaded into massive distillation chambers. We see young living men carefully cleaning the chambers in lieu of filling these chambers to begin the proprietary steam extraction distillation process. To meet young living distillation standards, proper temperature must be maintained throughout the distillation process, and pressure, length of time, equipment, and batch size are strictly monitored. Through gas chromatograph and mass spectrometer testing, Young Living maintains world-leading quality. Observing the steam distillation, Gary Young and Terry Seacrest discussed the natural oil after it has come through the condenser. Gary's extensive experience allows him to gauge the number of gallons in the oil chamber. Terry mentioned her sore neck due to an uncomfortable hotel bed, so Gary opens the valve, sharing the most recently distilled Idaho balsam oil for Terry to rub on her shoulders and neck. This is the process by which therapeutic grade oil is produced.
You know, this morning I woke up with kind of a crick in my neck from the hotel room we were in, and I put this on just right down here 2 or 3 minutes ago, and already my neck feels great.
Isn't it fabulous? It goes back to what you're saying, Terry. It's the quality of the product, and when people get results, they don't walk away.
That's right. Well, we are so grateful for what we have seen in this last week and experienced, and I just want to thank you personally for all of our friends and colleagues for what we've experienced and what you're doing.
And I want to thank you and Randall for the help, the participation, and the cheerleading on the side.
Okay.
That was great, and it's been good for us. We've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to know, viewers, any of the viewers out here, who they've ever met in their lifetime that can, get up at the crack of dawn and do so many different tasks, from being here cutting trees and bringing them out of the forest in northern Idaho to then maybe changing clothes and being in a meeting, a corporate level meeting, to then jumping in a plane and flying to Ecuador and managing the farm there, and finally at the end, driving every piece of equipment you can imagine and building a good part of those pieces of equipment, and also then finally, maybe shoeing his horse at the end of the day, only to go in to tuck his 2 boys into bed. So you won't meet a man like this. So it's been our great pleasure to have spent time with him.